Looping, or iterating through code, means that you create a block of code and then execute it multiple times. How many times you execute it depends on various conditions. In Visual Basic, you can create looping constructs using keywords like for, while, do, for each, and exit. I'll demonstrate some of these constructs in the loops project, and I'll start with the for loop code, which I'll place into the mainwindow.xaml.vb file. In the beginning file, I've created a bunch of sections, each with a label indicating what kind of code I'll be adding. I'll look at the code in full screen and scroll down and show that I have sections for loops, while loops, do loops, infinite do's, and for each. I'll start with the for loop. You can use the for loop to loop while watching a counting value. The syntax looks like this. Start with the keyword for, and then declare a variable. Typically, it'll be an integer value, but you can use any other numeric data type. I'm going to declare a variable called forCount, and I'll set its data type as integer. The next step is to set beginning and ending values. Put in an assignment operator, equals, and then set the low value, then the keyword to, and the high value. When you press enter, Visual Studio adds the keyword next. Now any code that you add between for and next will be executed. At the end of the loop, the counter variable, forCount in this example, will be incremented by 1. You can change the increment value by using the keyword step. For example, step 2 means increment by 2 each time through the loop. The step keyword is optional though, and by default, you'll be incrementing by 1. Now, I'll add just a single line of code to execute each time through the loop. I'll use my output subroutine, and I'll output for value is, and I'll append forCount.toString. I'll test the application and click the Go button, and there's the result. I'm looping and displaying the values 3 times. You can also execute loops using the while keyword. The while keyword lets you examine any condition, not just numeric values. It looks like this. Start with the keyword while, and then enter a Boolean condition. I've declared a variable called whileCount and set it to 1 initially, and I'll tell the while loop to keep looping as long as that value is less than or equal to 3. When you use the while keyword, the ending clause for the while keyword is endWhile, and Visual Studio will add it automatically when you press enter. Now within the loop, I'll once again do an output, and I'll say while count is, and I'll append the value. And then after I've output the value, I'll increment the value by 1. Unlike the for loop, incrementing doesn't happen automatically. In a while loop, you have to do it yourself. So I'll say while count equals while count plus 1. And when I run the application and click the Go button, I once again get the output 3 times. The next type of loop I'll take a look at is called a do loop. Like the while loop, the do loop doesn't have any auto-incrementing. You have to manage all of your conditions and values yourself. Start by typing the keyword do and pressing enter. The closing clause for the do loop is called loop. I'm working with a variable called doCount, which is already declared and set to 1. Just as I did with the other loops, I'll do some output, and I'll say doCount is, and I'll output the value. Then I'll increment the value with doCount equals doCount plus 1. Now at this point, it's an infinite loop. It'll keep on looping because I haven't set any conditions. You can set your conditions after the keyword loop by adding either an until or a while keyword. If you use until, it examines the value and breaks out of the loop when the condition is matched. I'll use a condition of greater than 3. So the first time I hit the output command, the value will be 1, the second time it'll be 2, the third time it'll be 3, but then after the third output, I'll increment it to 4, I'll hit this until clause, and the condition will be false, and I'll jump out of the loop. And here's the result, once again looping 3 times. You can also use the do keyword to do something called an infinite loop. I'm going to take this much code and copy it to the clipboard, and then I'll paste it down here after the redeclaration of doCount. If you prefer, instead of using until or while after the loop keyword, you can instead do your own evaluation within the loop and then break out of the loop using the keyword exit. If you've worked in Java or C#, you might be familiar with the break statement. In Visual Basic, exit is very similar. It will let you jump out of a loop very easily. Within the do loop, I'll place the cursor after the code that's incrementing my value. Then I'll add an if statement, and my condition will be if do count is greater than 3. So now, to break out of the do loop, I'll use the keyword exit. You can use the keyword exit to exit a do loop or to exit a subroutine. I'm going to exit the do loop. Once again, I'll run the app and test it. And there's the result. I'm once again looping 3 times. Finally, let's take a look at the for each loop. You can use the for each loop to iterate over the values in a data set, such as an array. Here, I've declared an array of integers. The opening and closing parentheses after the data type means it's an array, not just one integer. And then I'm declaring the array with a pair of braces wrapped around a comma-delimited list. Now, to loop through those values, I can use for each, and then I declare an element or a variable. I'll just name it I for integer. I'll set its data type as integer, and then say that I'm looping in the numbers array. The closing keyword for a for each loop is next, just like the for loop. And within the for each loop, I'll output the current value. And there's the result. Just as in the other examples, I get 3 iterations. And that's because there are 3 values in the dataset. If I add another value and run the code again, I'll get 4 iterations. So that's a look at all the different ways that you can loop through code in Visual Basic. Choose the version of looping that makes sense for your programming requirement. Fors, whiles, dos, for eaches, and exits.